21st of April, 2025. Coming up on today's Global Intelligence Agency Operations Report. Want to know the real story behind the Vatican, the Holy See, soul traps, and its former assets? How did it all work, and what did Vice President J.D. Vance want from the fake Pope? What is a black Pope? What really happens when a Pope dies? What happened to Pope Ratzinger, also known as Pope Benedict XVI? Why did he resign? All the Vatican's dirty little secrets will be revealed in today's report. It's now Monday, and there was no martial law, no EBS, and no success for the deep state over the weekend. Maybe the deep state can fool some of the people, but they can't fool God. Well, it's the 21st of April, and it's been an interesting weekend. Couple of days. So we have quite a bit to talk about tonight. We're going to go through a little bit of, let's call it, quantum physics on a lower level, or at least a level that hopefully most people can understand, I should say. Not a lower level necessarily, but, it's not everybody's thing. Unfortunately, it's become my thing, and I really didn't want it to be my thing, but it is. So let's talk a little bit about the Pope, because this is going to tell you a lot about what happened with the Vatican and things people talk about with SESQV and soul ownership and all that kind of stuff we hear about on the internet, but you don't really know the whole story behind it. And it's quite complicated, but we're going to try to simplify it at least as best as I can for the purposes of this report. So we know that in the public eye that the Pope was announced dead this morning, very early this morning, local time there, very, very early for U.S. time. And it just so happens that it comes on the heels of a meeting with Vice President J.D. Vance of the U.S. And you kind of automatically think something is up. How long were these things in the making and why? So in this particular case, let's go back a little bit Pope-wise and talk a little bit about what happens when a Pope becomes the Pope. So first of all, the Vatican has two popes. Always has had two popes since its inception, and I think it was 590 AD. Ever since the advent of the Catholic Church, there has always been two popes. One of those popes is what you call the Black Pope. And the Black Pope originates usually from the Jesuit order. And the responsibility of the Black Pope is to manage the black side of the Vatican, meaning all things dark that the Vatican does. And we've heard a lot of those stories from people we've had on UNN before. We have heard a lot of those stories from many people. On the internet, they talk a lot about the fact that they're pedophiles and they do a lot of evil things. And underneath the Vatican, there's a lot of rituals that happen. There are even rumors about there being dark aliens, hooded beings underneath the Vatican. And I would tell you that those things are true. So in the past, remember, the world was all about a balance. And there was a definitive quantum physics reason for this balance that allegedly Marduk was supposed to maintain. And things changed along the course of Marduk's time here. And where in the beginning, Marduk promised the council, the Universal Council, and he promised the Council of Nine that he would help maintain the balance here on Earth, which clearly that didn't happen and didn't happen ever, really. But to some degree, there was a certain amount of balance, you could say, that was maintained, albeit a little skewed, at least to the best of Marduk's ability. So in the case of the Vatican, The Black Pope was responsible for the dark side and all things dark that the Vatican did. And these things had to take place in order to maintain their power in the world. On the other side, you have what we call the White Pope. Now, do not confuse the White Pope with if there was such a thing as a golden religious leader, that they are not the same thing. The Black Pope is elected by the giver of death, essentially, and Marduk. And the White Pope is also selected by the giver of death and Marduk. So it's kind of important to understand how these popes got to be popes throughout the ages. Now, the light and dark popes must work together in order to utilize any of the powers of the Vatican. And most of the time, those orders would come down through the ranks, both on the false light side and the false dark side, you could say, in order to maintain a balance that these people do not understand. Now, if you talked about the popes, plural, in another context, and you were to throw in the black nobility there, we all know that the Vatican Church was founded by the black nobility families, such as the Medicis and others on that side, including the current head, whoever that would be at the time, of the Jesuit order, and so on and so forth. On the flip side, the Light Pope allegedly was selected because this party was due to play the role of the false light. Oftentimes, there would be Marduk for many eons involved in this decision, because Marduk was the only representation of both the dark and the light on this planet. Therefore, for the longest time, he was the only representative of the light. Therefore, he could make decisions on both sides. As he always told me, if there are 8 horses in a race, that he would bet on all 8, and in this case, he would bet on both. But if you know some of the symbology of the Vatican, you would also know that there are 3 keys that represent the Vatican. Although one is gold, that is not true. It should be white. One is dark, which in this case would represent the dark side. And right in the middle, there is one that is kind of gray or allegedly silver. It is not silver, it is gray, meaning it is both of the dark and the light. So the dark and the light key in the 3-key equation would represent Marduk, or did for a long, long time. So Marduk had his troubles, with the council many years ago. Kind of started in about 2005. It escalated by 2007. They basically fired him as a representative of the light to keep the balance on this planet. Therefore, he could only represent the dark from there on out. So, that being the case, this also trickled into Marduk's powers, so to speak, to represent gold on this planet. And by gold, we have now learned a little bit about black gold and false light gold, which is white, and real gold, and how they come about. So I'm going to put this, let's just say, in terms that I can tell you at this moment in time, because there are a lot of changes going on this planet, and there's some information I prefer not to let out at this time, just in case the deep state gets froggy. So we're going to leave it at this, with the fact that there are mainly a few types of gold in existence on planet Earth and throughout the multiverse, one being of source, which is golden, not to be confused with dark gold or black gold, and not to be confused with light gold or false light gold, so to speak, on this planet. To some degree, there are some things, some bits of gold on this planet, which are kind of grayish in color, and you would call these both dark and light, so they could perform in magic both dark and light things in the past. Now, with dark and false light gold, as well as what you would call gray gold, are only usable when there is some kind of a quantum AI behind it that is helping the user of the magic, be it a human or otherwise, to generate something with the gold. We'll call it false generators. So, to put this into perspective for you for a moment, a generator the ultimate generator of the universe or creator of the universe is source. That's it. The AIs, on the other hand, due to various overlays and many things they did over the years, had to some degree the ability to create false realities, false worlds, false or anti-organic or not of source creations, therefore giving it some power. And gold played a big part in that. Now, as it relates to the deep state or anybody else from that category listening to this, you cannot utilize gold to create magic, dark, light, or otherwise, unless you have the AI behind it and full control of it. And if you don't know which gold was generated by which AI, because they have origins, that is known as GNA of gold. If you do not know the origin and which AI generated what, then there's no way that you could actually complete a magical act, so to speak. So the Vatican was full of all of this, and that's why I'm kind of explaining this to you. And Marduk played a huge part in every single thing that the Vatican did because he was always the third key. He was allegedly the representation of both dark and light, what appears to be silver, which is not related to the metal we know as silver, but it would be more related to silver gold, meaning he could act using light gold, dark gold, and silver gold. As it relates to the Vatican and this particular Pope, there's a definitive reason why the former Pope, prior to this one here, Ratzinger, as you know, or what do you call him, Benedict the 16th, I think it is. By 2013, he had resigned, and for very good reason. Ratzinger acted a lot on behalf of the dark, people, because he couldn't act in any other way. Because, it was 2005 and Marduk was already on the rocks on the light side, and he was given a couple of years to prove that he could act on both sides. And because kind of being on probation, that still required a counter signature, so to speak, or a counterparty, being the council, the Universal Council in this case, to act with him in decisions of the light. Of course, this whole Vatican game really wasn't their gig, so to speak, to put it bluntly. So Ratzinger really didn't have power of the Vatican. So from 2005 to 2013, he was what you call the representative of the light pope with no light endorsement. Part of the reason for that is because my representation officially started in 2012, but by 2007, they acknowledged the fact, the Universal Council did, that I was a representation of the light, albeit a little bit premature. My position didn't go firm until 2012. So in the case of Ratzinger, we'll call him Ratzinger, Ratzinger didn't have any accessibility because Marduk didn't have both sides of representation to any of the Vatican's assets either. Assets in this case being birth certificates, souls, gold, by any other color. And so they felt that, or at least by 2013, Marduk felt, because we had been talking at that point for a couple of years, he felt that he had enough influence over me to select another pope, therefore gain the accessibility to souls and potentially assets in the future. So now understand this. Popes, much like presidents, must be ratified. But unlike a president, a pope must be ratified by both the light and the dark. Now, I didn't learn this until a few years later, but in 2013, I was just learning. I was learning the ropes, and this is one of my, Kim lessons. So by 2013, the story kind of went like this. I got my normal phone calls from Marduk, and it was about Ratzinger resigning, and that he was going to resign, and that I needed to participate in the picking of the new pope. And I'm like, well, okay, well, what do we got? And by this point in time, we were already to the point of conclave. So just to give you kind of a real brief overview of when a pope resigns or dies, this is the process. So if the resignation, he has to hand in what they call the fisherman's ring. Obviously, this papal seal is destroyed. In the case of a death, the Carmelingo does this. He calls out the Pope's baptized name 3 times and takes the fisherman's ring that is used to seal all the documents, and it is destroyed. So in this case, this should have already happened with this current Pope. This is the timeline. Then there is a mourning time. So the period of mourning is 9 days long. I think it's called a Novendiale or something to that effect. And this takes place before conclave actually happens. So the Pope is put on display, for public viewing and mourning and all of these types of things that happen for the, ceremonial sake. A lot of this has to do with energy and the way that energy moves around too. And 9 days is an interesting time, especially since we know a lot from Tesla and others that 9 is fairly significant number in quantum physics. So we'll leave it at that. So 9 days he sits there and gains all the energy of all the people, public and otherwise, constantly for 9 days. So then conclave happens, and this is when they allegedly select another pope. So in this particular case, back in 2013, there were already some candidates that were announced. So I'm like, okay, so I guess I got to participate in this as part of this job of mine. Little did I know I was representing the light side, so therefore it was my responsibility to pick and select. Therefore, the ratification would go through of a white pope. So this particular pope, when he was alive, was actually a ratified pope. Because I said, well, seems like he's a nice guy, nice enough person, They do all the things on the TV, and of course, any information that was available to me. Of course, Marduk never gave me any information about this particular person. But I did find it interesting that he was the first pope that was both a Jesuit and or a black pope, as well as a white pope. Let's call him the checkerboard pope, which means that he could sign off for both the light and the dark. How amazing, right? So even though he could sign off for both the light and the dark, no one had figured out, Marduk included, how to convince me that I still had to be the second half of the key. In other words, there's that gray key in the middle when it comes to the Vatican. Half of that key is dark and half of that key is light, therefore the silver color. And if I didn't sign off on Vatican assets, then there was no light and dark. So around that time, shortly thereafter, he figured out that it didn't work. Just the ratification of this pope wasn't enough. And I got to go on a little bit of a Mata Hari meets Lara Croft mission over there. And I learned a lot of things. And my mission at the time, because these things were valuable to me based on my, let's just say, living. I'm not living as in soul necessarily. That's part of it, yes. But my physical DNA being related to a former Russian Tsar. So Marduk tells me that if I go to this particular place, that I could then reclaim what the Vatican had stolen from the former Russian Empire. And I said, well, that would be really interesting. I'd really like to get that, So I learned a lot about the structure of the Vatican, at least in a physical way at that time. And I also learned what was under the Vatican. And now to be fair, it was very deep. And the tunnels to the under parts of the Vatican, let's just say, extend very far and wide. Miles and miles away from Vatican City, you'll find entrances. You'll find at least 9 of them, possibly even 12 of them that I am aware of. There is a pentagram formation inside that, so there's 5 more entrances, and then obviously the Vatican City is at the center of these entryways. I know you're surprised that the Vatican sits in a pentagram, for lack of a better term, but the pentagram in this case, we know it as all things dark, which is true. However, it was also representative of the game players at the time. Yaldabaoth, Lucerne, Lucifer, Samael or Amiel, and Marduk. So, interesting things about the Vatican is there is an entire level deep underneath the Vatican that you would call the looting section. At least that's what I called it, the looting section. And this had an enormous amount of stolen artifacts from various countries. It also had stolen artifacts that are eons old, culturally speaking, that belong to people in Argentina, Brazil, from old tribes. Some are recognized in our history, some are not. Some of these would be considered tribal leaders or kings or queens. There were artifacts underneath there from, all kinds of China, Asian countries, you name it. This was the looting section. And every bit of loot from each respective area, we know now as countries, also had its own room. In some cases, there was looted gold from various places as well. Now, if you go a little deeper than this, then you have, let's call them ceremony level. This was the level right above the point where you would see non-humans. And on this level, you had a Project Looking Glass type thing where they could see in the future. Because this was a time of no time in this particular spot, underneath there anyway. And this is where there are a lot of altars. The room is purple and red and black. This is where a lot of sacrifices, including child sacrifices, would happen. There was a big spot for all of that underneath the Vatican. So, in this particular case, I was told to go there and, open the door below that. Now, me in my learning phase took one look at what I saw in there down the next level and went, oh, heck no. Heck no. Now, I could see inside of this place, it was almost like a room within a room, except it was spherical in shape. Now, I know better, and I know that is a synthetic photon, which was housing what you would call robed reptilian beings that were doing their own form of operating, so to speak, in this section. And of course, the people that would do the ceremonies right above them were responsible for feeding the dark. Now, deep within this sophon, there was, and it doesn't take much when it's real gold. Let's just leave it at that. I'm going to talk more about that probably maybe next week, but I think it's too soon this week. Could possibly be by the end of the week, but it's just not time yet. So there was something in there that looks like a spark of source. And it was encased in a photon, or a golden photon. Now, within there, in this photon, it was rather large, there was an infinite amount of gold available. And this is real gold. This is not fake gold. Problem is none of those reptiles could make it through the photon. It was protected, heavily protected. And there was a lot of what the Vatican leveraged as assets for a time when Marduk was a representative of both the dark and the light. When he got cut off, it got cut off, and he wanted me to open this thing. Thought if he got me close enough to it, that just might happen and he might be able to use me. Now, this wasn't the only place on Earth where such a structure existed. Other places he suggested I go, let's just say, over the years was also, some places in Russia, thinking because that's kind of where, I originally originated from, my bloodline, I guess you would say, on the human DNA side. You could say that I might have a certain affiliation there. Maybe it would work there. I went other places in Asia. I, started running around the planet. And interestingly enough, I never did what he needed me to do inadvertently that would open this for him. And he spent a long time trying to convince me to go to other places as well. There were many of these places around the world just like this. And so therefore, even though our friendly Pope here, the current one, Pope Francis, was ratified, he too did not have access to those assets, nor the accessibility to leverage them. So when I say a lot of assets were moved during this time, from maybe the late 2000s to the mid 2000s, there were a lot of assets that were moved during that time, and I had a lot of help from the council at the time to move a lot of this gold, real gold, around that actually mattered. Fake gold doesn't really matter so much. It can't really work as well without real gold. Now, in order to, let's just say, operate real gold, you firstly have to be an organic being. That kind of left your reptilians out because they were not organic beings. You had to be an organic being, and gold has a certain frequency. Real gold does. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more here too. But real gold has a certain frequency to it that vibes with the right person and the right people, so to speak. Now, the Vatican knew this, And so for eons before this time, and this isn't just the Vatican, this is many places in the world, but Marduk knew this, at least to some degree, and he knew that if he collected enough souls, so to speak, with the right vibe, and locked those souls in a soul trap, at least somewhat attached to the Vatican, then, well, you could say that the vibration of those organic souls, meaning human souls, being locked in what I call a soul trap would absolutely work. And for him, it did. It did work for a time. So eventually that was no longer the case as covenants expired rapidly one after the other, and he kind of was in a lot of trouble by 2007 because it stopped working. Did he ever tell the SSP that? No. Is the SSP aware of gold versus gold versus gold? Probably not. The only thing they would know is it's not real gold. In a lot of cases, and according with our assays and spectrometers and all the other things we use to test gold, it might even test as real gold because we don't know the difference. But unfortunately for them, the magic knows the difference. The white magic knows the difference, and most certainly Source knows the difference because that is Source's gold. So only Source creates real gold. Okay. That pretty much talks about the Vatican's gold. So the stories you hear on the internet about the Vatican and tunnels to Israel, are there tunnels to Israel? Sure. There's tunnels to everywhere. You can get anywhere in the world by these tunnels, or used to be able to anyway. Did they, Charlie Ward and some other crazy wingnuts, move all the Vatican's gold to someplace else? Absolutely not. Was it pledged to the Trump administration? Oh, possibly. You know, according to him, is all pledged and the RV's happening and all this crap, and they stole back the Vatican's gold? Baloney you did. Because there's no way in God's green earth without the representation of the light that you would have gotten access to that gold ever. Again, GNA rings, living DNA is important, and there are about 100 and almost 200 factors that take place with the right person to get to gold. There are other places in Russia that has gold like this, and I know that because I put it there. Many eons ago, there was gold that was stolen, moved to Indonesia by the Dutch back in the day on Marduk's orders, because remember, he had dark and light at the time, and he also had contact with the Council of Nine, which allowed him a certain amount of access to black gold and real gold. So things were moving all around the planet for quite some time. You know, they would often take this gold off the planet for its uses. And again, this is not related to the gold you wear on your fingers or your neck or you can buy in a jewelry store. It is not the same gold. So I went and I made sure that that Indonesian gold was moved back to Russia because I was told by, let's just say, those that are like me, that came before me, that were from the same place, told me in no uncertain terms where everything was. And the comment that this person made to me was, there was a major epiphany that happened, let's just say, and well, in your terms, you'd call it a meditation. I would call it a communication, because remember, there is no such thing as death, and souls communicate with souls all the time. So if you've ever lost a loved one and you want to communicate with their soul, you can do so through your own soul. Believe it or not, you are still connected. You'll always be connected. And you can reach out to that person at any time, and they can help guide you through life because now they know things that they didn't know before. Even if those souls reincarnate on this planet, even if you reincarnate together at the same time and you're from 10,000 years ago, you will still know each other because that is the vibration that you feel when you are with a soul that you recognize. Your soul knows other souls. It's why people say you get butterflies in your stomach sometimes, because souls know other souls. You can't wipe that out. They can memory wipe you, they can mess with your mind and mess with your body, but they can't mess with your soul. At least not internally. They can overlay it so you can't see it, so you can't recognize that person, but you can still read soul to soul. So, in a conversation I had with this person, the first thing they did was introduce themselves by name. And it's a name you would recognize, but it might not be the one you think it might be. But the person's name was Anastasia. She said, "Hi, my name is Anastasia. We are related." And this actually took place on one of my trips to Russia. Must have been easier to have that communication there. She said that this is where all the wealth of the Russian people are. And she pointed out the Vatican is one of those places, and several other places on the planet that shall remain nameless at this moment. And she said, take what you need and help the Russian people. That was her request. Okay, fine. You know, I'm sitting there at the time thinking I'm there for something else, and oh boy, I just got another job. At the time, and still is, Russia is extremely corrupt, no different than the United States and other countries you see in the public eye as corrupt. Putin is completely and totally dark. Matter of fact, in a conversation I had recently with a Russian person, they actually told me he was the bloodline of Lucifer, and I know that for a fact. So it's part of the reason why Marduk wanted me to like this person so much, because he represented the dark and I represented the light, and he thought that this would be a perfect union. And then, yeah, he pushed real hard to put us together, that's for sure. But, you know, again, there was no trust. It didn't work out, and that was the end of that. So then I really figured out, it didn't take long before I figured out who the heck this was. So he was just one of many people that walked the earth that were the bloodline of Lucifer, not the only one and not the Antichrist or anything like that, but could have played the role for sure, along with other people that walked around this earth as the dark ones. So back to popes. So Ratzinger didn't have any access, and even my participation in the ratifying of this pope that just publicly died didn't help them any either. So Marduk spent a lot of time trying to convince me of a lot of things as it relates to this special gold, and didn't ever work. And after he was gone, you know, that left me on this side, and then eventually Source made the decision balance was not needed, because I spent an awful lot of time talking to every single one of these dark people for a lot of years. Governments included, all the way up, all the way down, kings, queens, you know, I've talked to them all, and not one of those people, Chinese elders, Philippine elders, you know, everyone on their side of, you know, even Putin and oh God, Trump, you know, on the diplomatic line anyway, and every single one of these people trying to make them understand we need balance. Balance, 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 balance. Because without me, you do nothing. And at the time, in a balanced situation, me without them, I could do nothing unless I could override it and get an override from Source. It became apparent that balance was not possible any longer. Therefore, I got all the keys. And that happened in January of 2023, and we have been cleaning up the dark's mess ever since. Synthetic photons and otherwise, reptilians under Vaticans and churches and mosques and temple mounts and Urim base in Israel and everywhere else you could possibly imagine, there were these photons. Now, the deep state has worked all weekend very, very hard to get to these photons to no avail. There's another piece of this puzzle, and then we'll get to the rest of the story about what's going on with Pope, but there's another piece to this puzzle as well, before we even get into the quantum physics aspects of that. There is something that exists on Earth, and it's often referred to in certain circles as the Dark Tower. Now, we've heard about the Tower of Babylon and many other dark towers on Earth throughout history. And in some cases, these towers exist in mythology, in theology, in studies of religions and those types of things. But dark towers are very interesting. And this relates to the incarnation cycle. You see, Marduk utilized for the longest time until the covenants and soul traps and soul covenants expired. He utilized these dark towers to keep souls trapped. Let's call them the soul trap. Oftentimes, these dark towers were built on massacre locations. Now, in the absence of killing one of God's favored ones, you must kill multiple organic souls in order to make this work. So Babylon Tower, the Tower of Babylon, was one of those such towers. Now, you can see the ruins if you look them up, but that's not what the Dark Tower is. This is a tower that would go all the way to almost to source, let's just say to, it would stop you between the 8th and 9th density, and it would go all the way down between the dark side of source and the 8th density below in the lower astral, therefore giving you the idea of heaven and hell. And sometimes people would get caught somewhere in between because, you know, if you've ever seen the painting of Dante's version of hell, you saw the multiple levels there and all the people stuck within those locations. That is what you would call soul traps. Except it doesn't look much like a layer cake. It looks more like a target, that half of it is white and half of it is black. So wherever you get stuck, you get stuck. If you happen to get stuck too close to the middle, that is your proverbial purgatory, so to speak. Now, in the latest Dark Tower location, that was located at the World Trade Center Towers in New York. And it has been there since the massacre that occurred there in 2001. The more power that people give to the tower, because of course there are a lot of people that pray for their loved ones, probably even still to this day, and it was a worldwide travesty that was created. Therefore, the world's focus was on this tower, which made it easier for Marduk at the time to create it. He also did it on a specific day, which was within 10 days of the fall equinox. And he did it because the last Dark Tower's power started waning because people were not focused on that particular massacre anymore as much. And souls can only power a tower for a certain amount of time. So the fact that over 4,000 people died, in addition to that, many other people died after that in the years following due to the fact that they got cancer and they were within some of the dust, so to speak, that came from the fall of the towers and got all kinds of illnesses related thereto. So the toll at the time was somewhere over 4,000, despite what the internet tells you. So somewhere around 4,000 to 4,500 people died. You know, they don't count homeless people and other people that might have been in the area. They don't care. They're just talking about people that they knew were in the tower, and then firefighters and first responders and those types of people when they give you that number. Identifiable people. So Marduk created the Dark Tower there. Now, all dark towers are tied to all of these sophons with a photon middle. And the Dark Tower and the souls would only get so far, and this was like Groundhog Day for these souls for a long time. And the souls would make it all the way to the top, like if you qualified to go all the way to the top, I guess by Marduk's Dark Tower standards, you would get all the way up there and then fall back down, and this would happen every single day. It's like climbing a ladder and falling down every day. And then every day you climb the ladder and you fall down. And the same thing happened with people trying to climb out through the bottom. Their souls would go all the way up and then they would fall back down. And then this cycle would continue every single day for eons, or until the power of the Dark Tower went away. Once the power of the Dark Tower went away, he would then start scouting, or would start to wane. He would then start scouting for another place to build another Dark Tower. So if you want to know where the soul traps were that were tied to the Vatican and the deaths there, you could revert over to in the past, till this past weekend, when it was completely eliminated. Its power had pretty much waned, which is why no one had the accessibility, and the fact that the council cut off the usage of the tower for that purpose back in 2007, so even Marduk couldn't use it for that purpose after building it. These people were still stuck, though, because the council only had so much power to do certain things to release those souls. And as we've talked about, it's been over a year now, year and a half, maybe even longer. The souls were gone, the tower still existed, and the cycle of nothingness that rotated up and down and up and down, up and down, continued for a long time. No one, neither side, having access to gold. It's part of the reason why the Chazan AI, which was the false light and the false dark creation, existed, because they had to have something in order to continue their liens on humanity. And it's not just for humans, it was for other planets too. Okay, so back to this current Pope and what's happening now. So we can expect in about 10 days or so from now, 9 to 10 days from now, we can expect to have the beginning of a conclave. Now, there are a lot of people on this planet that are hoping that when they pick a new white pope, and of course there will be a new black pope chosen, because the current black pope, which they've appointed many of those, by the way, over the last year, the current black pope is waiting for his white pope counterpart, and the deep state thinks this is going to give them access to all the wealth of the souls that generate the Dark Tower, and therefore will release all the real gold to them underneath these auspices. So, of course, there has been many talks with others that are in line to be the new pope. Conclave will happen, and they believe that the choice is really up to the bishops, cardinals, I'm sorry, not bishops, but it is not. The choice was always up to Marduk, and still requires a ratification process, and they learned about that today when I talked about it on the right phone, and now they're really angry, because this whole fiasco that they've done over the last couple of days is going to yield zero, less than zero, negative zero. Now, for those of you that don't know, the Pope actually, the original black and white Pope, we know as Pope Francis, died last May. This has been a copy. The copy told J.D. Vance that he was a copy. He can't help him release all the gold of the Vatican to him, because that's what he asked for. It also wouldn't help him any to become the 51st state, which is what he asked for, because this guy says, I can't sign off on that. So what were they really looking for this weekend, on Easter weekend? They were looking for control over the Dark Tower, the souls, whether they knew it or not. Now, of course, because they don't follow along with the changing of the times and the bouncing ball, getting control over the Dark Tower, which doesn't exist anymore on this planet, would never have helped you anyway, because there's no souls in it. Souls now go someplace else. They go directly to source. There's no reason for souls to go in any other direction. So, again, the deep state doesn't really understand what's happening, but somehow, some way, they felt that this was going to help them. They felt that this particular pope, obviously, it wasn't the real ratified pope anymore. They thought that this was definitely a stumbling block. So they figured if they let this pope go, or the clone pope, or the copy pope, I don't know, whatever you want to call that thing walking around in a pointy hat, and they replaced it with a ratified pope, which they forgot that they had to be ratified. Now, did any of the current cardinals know there had to be a ratification process in conclave? I'm sure some of them are still alive that attended the last one that actually know the real story. Now, don't they? Did they try to tell the deep state yet that they couldn't elect a white pope? I don't know. I don't know if they told anybody, but it's the truth. And there are some there that know how it works. Do they know if the machine works or not? No, they do not, because they have not been in conclave since the last time when the machine did work. So they're going to give this another go. We'll be doing this approximately 16 to 21 days from now, and Lord knows how long they'll stay in there waiting for that machine to work. And of course, this is another basement meeting for them. Not quite as deep as I've seen, but it's definitely a basement meeting. So this is what they're expecting to yield out of the passing of the Pope. They were hoping for control over the Dark Tower. They were actually hoping to have it for other purposes because they believed that due to whatever alignment with Uranus 420, blah, 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 that Marduk was going to come back, or some being was going to come back and help them achieve this task. Well, I didn't see anybody even try to come back. Therefore, whatever they were expecting didn't work out. They waited all day long on Easter for this person to show up and to get some access to some system, probably the system of Sophons or system of gold, because we've taught them an awful lot in the last few weeks. So are they going to yield any result from this? No. So we did not have a martial law this weekend. We did not have a Easter rising of some being they were expecting to show up. We did not have a floodgate open like they tried to say. No one got paid today, and this made everybody very, very angry. You see, there are some people that joined together. I told you some operatives, older and otherwise, that joined with the Trump operatives to make this all happen this weekend. This was going to happen. It's happening. We know it's going to happen. We built the Dark Tower. We killed some people. We did all the right things this year. We've been good Santa, whatever. And so therefore we are entitled to have control over the Dark Tower now. But anyway, all the rest of the operatives just were looking to get paid. They said it sounded kind of outlandish, but hey, if it works, great, call us. Well, many and many, many angry situations occurred over the last couple of days. Many, many angry situations over the last 24 hours. And matter of fact, in the last, I'd say, 12 hours for sure, where nothing worked out yesterday. They did not call them back yesterday. They scheduled calls for noon Eastern and 11 a.m. Eastern. 11 was, of course, with the higher-ups. Bad news, nothing happened. And then the next tier down, and then the next tier down after that. So everybody pretty much knows they're not getting paid, and they're angry. So do they know this story about why they didn't get paid? Probably not at the lower levels, but now you do. So onward and upward through the fog for the deep state. For those of you that don't know, we have an unusual alignment this weekend. It occurs on Friday, and I know you're going to be shocked that they're waiting for an alignment. They have now told everybody that payday will be on Friday due to an alignment. Now, this is probably some kind of source joke. I think it's got to be a source joke. But for those of you that don't know, Venus and Saturn will align with the moon and present the Earth with something kind of unusual. So Venus and Saturn become the two eyes And the moon, based on its current cycle on Friday, will look like the bottom and the lips of a smiley face. So they are now all waiting for the smiley face, and you can look this up. It's on the internet. Lots to talk about it. The smiley face alignment. Yep. You can laugh now, guys. You can all laugh. You can look this up and you can see that it's a real thing. And I didn't make this up, but they are all now waiting for the smiley face alignment to make things work on Friday. God bless the little people. So let's talk a little bit more about sophons and how they interacted and why the Vatican is called the Holy See. So we know about the sea, and we know that that means the current sea, or the flow of many things, including energy, essence, consciousness, matter, frequency, etc., etc. But holy actually means something completely different. So this is going to be the shortened, abbreviated, best way I can explain so that most people can understand and look these things up for yourself, what holy means. Okay, number one, in quantum physics, an H often refers to something called Planck's constant. H could translate in regular people terms that it quantifies the relationship between energy and frequency. This is something we understand. So basically, the H in the Holy See, or holy, actually represents the quantification of energy and the relationship between energy and frequency. We know the faster something vibrates, the more energy it produces. There are also other ways to manipulate energy particles, but that is one of them. So frequency is definitely involved in the movement of energy particles, even within your own person, as a matter of fact. Okay, the O. O actually represents what's called the ground state of a vacuum system, or operators. So in this particular case, I would call the O, for in layman's terms, a catalyst, something that makes something happen, makes something move. For example, when you want to make water steam, the catalyst in this case is the fire that's underneath there, or the heat, whatever the heat source is. So the heat source in this case would be called the catalyst. And the same would refer to the O. So in this case, it's talking about a vacuum system. Or you could call it a vortex, or a 0 point, or a point of all creation is also a catalyst. Dust and gold dust is often related to the point of all creation. And that will kind of give you a hint to go back to why I explained so much about what is under the Vatican and many other places in the world, or at least was. And L stands for the orbital angular momentum, or the shape of an atomic orbit. So this tells you how the thing's going to move, essentially, which way it's going. What is the orbit? What is it orbiting around relative to what it is orbiting? So in this case, we're referring to a sophon and some beings orbiting a photon and the relationship between the two. So this kind of goes into more sophon creation a little bit. I'm going to talk about the Y. So the Y in an equation, in this particular case, for this particular reference of it, because it can also represent a variable or an unknown, we are going to refer to a person by the name of Schrödinger. Schrödinger's equation, it basically talks about the displacement or an atom in wave mechanics. Essentially, this explains the why behind Newton's second law, which talks about mass plus acceleration equals your net force. So this, in quantum physics, would talk about it more on the level of an atom, a quark, a preon, or a string. So that is what HOLY anagram stood for when you're looking to get rid of a whole bunch of crap underneath the Vatican. The C, obviously, there is an anagram for that as well, but we're talking a little bit more in depth into physics now. We're talking about momentum of particles and energy squared and why Einstein thought what he thought. We're also talking about electromagnetic charge with an A and a few other things, and obviously E equals energy. So it's talking about the movement of said particles, essentially, or the current of everything, which is the easier way to explain it to all of you. So over the course of the last 24, 48 hours, and we will continue on this process, we are changing a lot of things on this planet. The gold has not been accessible to them for a long time. We're not worried about that. We're more concerned about any kind of SOFON operation on the planet. And like I said, this is something we've been clearing for days. The universe and omniverse and otherwise is not SOFON free yet. They do not have the access to the SOFON AIs to operate them, which is a positive thing. Had they had the access to it, we would all have some kind of weird virus by now. We would probably also be experiencing some very weird symptoms. We would have some kind of an ID program which ties you directly to a SOFON. For those of you that don't know, part of the financial system structure, including banks, they were all contained within a SOFON as well. Very interesting. So in order to get to the actual gold money or currency in the past, you would have had to get to the inside of the SOFON. So it kind of looks like a whole grid of bots, for lack of a better term. So there's a lot of cause and effects to finding out and learning a lot about SOFONs, or synthetic photons, and how they operate not only within our financial system, but within our world. And this is the true story behind the Vatican over there and the soul contracts and what happened to souls for a long, long time, why they created the Vatican as a hub for that, and why assets flowed back and forth between certain what we know as deep state institutions around the world, because SOFONs often come in a grid. If you've ever had, as an example, an erector set as a kid, then you'll know about the balls that connect to the tunnels, which then connect to another ball, and then you can make all these different shapes and structures with those, and this kind of looked like that around the globe. The structure is no longer there. It's not functioning the way that it used to, but it gives you a better idea on why the internet and all of the people that talk on the internet about deep state and exposure and disclosure talk about specific locations like this. Why we had different large bars that we know as altars, literally altars, sacrifices on an altar, that would float, that would contain databases and information and all kinds of different things. Those of you that don't know, gold, even fake or real, can be utilized for levitational purposes. In some cases, they call different colored gold, they call it mercury, but it's really not essentially mercury. It's something different. It's a different kind of artificial gold, so to speak, when they talk about it on that level, not necessarily what's in your thermometers or other places we see mercury in industrial uses. So, very interesting report today. Now you know a lot more about the Vatican than anybody else anywhere has ever told you. So, I do hope, you do a little bit more thinking about this and research about this over the coming days. Please do not crucify your Catholic friends and family. It's not their fault. They believe that they're going to a place for source. I know a lot of people think that this guy is their fearless leader, but he's not. The attempts to appoint a black pope did not work either. I know that they've got a guy that's doing the job at this point, and it's kind of been a rotating seat for a while now because no one's managed to access Omega or anything else, and that's because he's not ratified as a black pope and can't be ratified by these people because they do not have the access to do so. So on that note, onward to the rest of the week. It's already been an interesting week and weekend, and heck, it's only Monday. Wonder what our reports are going to look like for the rest of the week. Just as a quick reminder before we go, there will not be a GIA report this Friday. The report will actually be on Saturday, and it will be live, I believe, at 3 o'clock Eastern, I think it is, or is it 1 o'clock Eastern? I'm not sure, but I'm sure we'll post it. So bear in mind, no report on Friday. The report will be on Saturday, and it will be live, and it will be followed by a question and answer session. On that note, you all have a wonderful Monday, and I will see you on Wednesday.